Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your kind invitation. You're all here. It's a great area. And the people that have actually put this on, thank you, because it's a terrific job. And thank you for your hard work. I'd like to just say, on behalf of Tony McIntyre, a really hard-working, lovely guy, absolutely a proper UKIPper through and through. He's doing a terrific job, and it's really a privilege for me to be able to support him. So I will pass on his good wishes to you, and he's sorry he can't be here today, but he's running around doing a massive amount of work. So we're all pulling in this together. So just to let you know, it's a big team thing, and we are all doing our very best, obviously led by Gerard, and you'll hear lots of wonderful speakers later today who are all part of that team. Just as a sort of introduction to the things I'd like to talk about today, for me, I think it was New Year 2015, we heard the first rumblings of women being unpleasantly attacked and sexually abused in Cologne. And I mentioned this in a FEM meeting quite reasonably, I thought, because it was in social media, but it was hushed, not wanting to be spoken about. And I can tell you that in the committee, a Labour lady MEP accused myself and another MEP of being racist for mentioning it. Well, I mean, the mood then was very much, oh, be quiet, don't say a thing about this. But we did. Now, fortunately, Nigel Farage saw this in camera meeting and quite rightly took it, because he's infinitely better known than I am. And he made something of this. He brought it to the public's attention. And that actually sort of woke a lot of people up, because they thought, really? But the media had been told, certainly in Germany, and I'm sure elsewhere in Europe, and certainly in the UK, play it down. But of course, people had recorded on their phones and had witnessed this abusive behaviour. So with that backdrop, it was very important, I think, to get a message out that women should be safe. Why not? You know, we take it for granted. And it's a very important question if you, your mum, your auntie, your granddaughter, your sister, were ever involved in such horrible, abusive behaviour, you'd feel absolutely devastated. And some of those women, really, it's very hard for them to come back and feel good about themselves, feel safe. So the safety angle was something that I always wanted to push, because I believe it's our right. And I think we've come a long way, and we should expect it, no less. So with that in mind, just a few words here, which I hope you'll understand. In the 20th century in Britain, saw women fight for and largely win equal civil, social and political rights. Through rising generations of British women have come to take such rights for granted. The history of women's emancipation, and indeed of women's repression, should tell us not to do so. Equal rights to inherit property did not arrive in our country until 1922. The right to vote was not granted to women until 1928. The Equal Pay Act did not come through until 1970. And the wide-ranging Sex Discrimination Act came along in 1975. Other moves towards equality have been even more recent than that. For example, it was as recently as 1988 that the Olympic Games held its first women's 10,000-metre race. Nearly all these advances came as a result of pressure, campaigning led by women themselves. The key point is this: we are only a couple of generations into the widespread acceptance of equal rights for women, and this phenomenon has largely been confined to a handful of advanced nations. So don't think that which was hard gained recently and arrived geographically, which is limited, can't be taken away, because it can. Whatever it is that unusually allowed women's rights to advance so spectacularly in our 20th century needs protecting and bolstering. And it must therefore follow that crude multiculturalism, the notion that new migrant groups should be at liberty to follow and modernise the culture and lifestyle of the country of origin, is definitely the enemy of women's rights. There is no culture I'm aware of that has been imported and allowed to persist unmodernised in Britain under the banner of multiculturalism, which women are in the possession of an elevated or superior right status compared to men. But there are several in which women are treated very much as second-class citizens. At their most extreme, some of these cultures doom women to live in pre-emancipation conditions, victims of vote stealing, prevented under the threat of violence from exercising sexual self-determination, and even subjected in childhood to the abomination of female genital mutilation. And rather than integrating and taking on the superior values of Britain, I'm afraid these Islamic communities, as they most often overwhelmingly are Islamic, are becoming more segregated, more militant over time after imposing the regressive values of their countries of origin in their new British localities. The main victims of this phenomenon are British Muslim women and girls. They are not the only victim, for some men in these communities have shown themselves eager to treat non-Muslim women and girls who do not uphold their notions of female modesty in a disgraceful way. Given that our Muslim population is the fastest growing section of our society, it is now paramountly important that politicians bolster the views and arguments of liberal Muslims who wish for their communities to break free of backward traditions which are prevalent in their countries of heritage and origin, and to embrace a modern Britain. Trevor Phillips has put it very, very well. We have to adopt a far more muscular approach to integration than ever, replacing the failed policy of multiculturalism. The ideas, which I'll outline today, form my contribution to such a muscular approach, and I urge politicians from other parties to show more courage on this issue and to speak out now. So let's start with the scourge of female genital mutilation. It's now widely accepted that many thousands of British girls every year have this grievous and life-changing abomination carried out upon them. And yet, not a single person has ever been prosecuted in connection with it. In 2003, the FGM Act, which made it a criminal offence for British citizens to carry out or facilitate FGM, even in a country where the practice is legal, must therefore be deemed a failure. In my opinion, the law needs to go much further. And just as our law enforcement agencies have too often turned a blind eye to FGM, so they have done the so-called honour violence too. And I propose that police forces, Crown Prosecution Services officers be instructed that far from treading lightly in order to avoid infringement of minority cultures, that they adopt a zero-tolerance approach to such offence, in order that people in minority communities can enjoy the majority rights. But what about measures right now to better protect girls from vulnerable backgrounds against the grooming gangs, which have been active in so many places? Well, I have a proposal here. Victims of grooming gangs from different ethnic or religious backgrounds than the perpetrators, this should be regarded by the legal system as an aggravated factor in the offence. In other words, when gangs of Pakistani heritage men rape and abuse working-class white girls, as has happened in so many towns and cities, it should now on be treated as a hate crime. This is the exact opposite of how it was treated in the days when political correctness led police forces to ignore such evil in their midst. The British welfare state, in all its guises, must also penalise and never reward polygamy, whether this is in regard to housing, allocation, benefits, payouts, or other forms of support. Polygamy has always and does lead to women being treated as second-class citizens, and we must give that no quarter. By raising the priority we give to integration, UKIP is acting as a positive and progressive force in society. Most importantly, we will be the party that works hardest to ensure that the rights hard won by women in the 20th century are not taken away in the 21st century. Thank you.